Game of Thrones, starting by hatching a giant dragon. Chapter 41, preparing for war. Daenerys sipped some warm water, slowly calming the rapid breathing in her chest. Although Drogo had left, the atmosphere in the hall remained suffocatingly tense. No one doubted that war would come. The only thing they did not know was when it would arrive. Viserys's face was grim as he returned to his room without a word. Illyrio Mapades ordered the gates of the entire mansion to be closed. Guards began patrolling between the walls and towers, and servants constantly moved food, arrows, and water, instantly turning the entire estate into a temporary fortress. In the center of the hall, a map depicting Pentos and the surrounding terrain was slowly spread out. Tomorrow, or at the latest the day after, they will arrive here. The Dothraki horses cannot see well at night, so they will launch their attack during the day. Illyrio Mapades' expression was grim. Drogo possesses the largest colossal in the entire Dothraki Sea with over 100,000 people. Can one dragon really hold them off? Jon looked up. What I do know is that they are not all warriors. There are old men, women, and children among them. There are not that many who can actually fight. Illyrio Mapades stretched out his chubby finger and pointed to the vast grassland south of the city. If I were the Dothraki, I would come from here. The terrain in the south is flat with no forests or hills. They can gallop all the way with almost no obstacles. Jorah Mormont looked down at the map and added in a deep voice. Over the past few decades, they have mostly taken this route when attacking Pentos. Cavalry fears complex terrain the most. They will certainly choose the fastest route. Hall suddenly fell silent. Everyone's gaze fell on the south side of the map. Jon, however, did not speak immediately. His gaze slowly swept across the entire map, moving from the south all the way to the east before landing on the hills to the north. A moment later, he reached out and tapped the map lightly. If they are only raiding, this route is indeed the best choice. If Drogo is preparing to lay siege to the city, he will not commit all his forces to a single route. Jorah frowned slightly. You mean splitting his forces? Jon nodded. Drogo is no fool. As long as he sends a few cavalry units to harass our flanks, it will be enough to pin down our defenders. Pentos is already short on troops. Once we are forced to disperse them, there will be vulnerabilities in our city defenses. Illyrio Mapades' expression shifted slightly. Then what should we do? We can't just split our forces into several groups, can we? Jorah pondered for a moment, then slowly shook his head. We cannot split them. Once dispersed, every position will become weak. The Dothraki cavalry are experts at defeating enemies in detail. Hall fell into silence once more. Just then, Jon suddenly smiled. Why must we wait for them to reach the city walls? This single sentence made everyone look up. Jorah looked at him. What do you mean? Jon's finger landed lightly on the southern grasslands on the map. I will patrol on Coldfire. As soon as I discover their main army, I will be the first to launch an attack. Illyrio Mapades was stunned for a moment. Just you alone? That is enough, Jon said calmly. A dragon's greatest advantage has never been dragonfire. It is the sky. They can see me, but they cannot touch me. I can continuously harass them, force them to slow their march, and even disrupt their entire formation. Coldfire will first block their path forward. A burst of dragonfire is enough to form a wall of fire. Their vanguard will stop, the cavalry behind will crash into the vanguard, and their entire formation will be thrown into chaos. Jorah frowned. What if they charge straight into the fire? Then let them burn. Jon's expression remained calm. Horses are more afraid of fire than people. As long as the front row warhorses are spooked, the entire Khalasar will lose its ability to charge. By then, Coldfire will continuously spew dragonfire from the flanks, cutting them into pieces. A light gradually lit up in Jorah's eyes. By the time they reach the city walls, their morale will have collapsed. Exactly, Jon nodded. Real decisive battle will take place outside the city of Pentos. I want Drogo to watch with his own eyes as his proud cavalry turns to ashes in dragonfire. Hall was silent for a few moments, then Jorah nodded slowly. I will take charge of the city wall defenses. As long as you can hold them back, I guarantee they will not storm the walls. Illyrio Mapades also nodded heavily. I will immediately send out all my scouts to monitor the southern grasslands day and night. As soon as the Dothraki are spotted, I will be notified immediately. Jon looked at the map and slowly withdrew his hand. It is settled. From now on, Pentos is in a state of war readiness. Just then, hurried footsteps sounded outside the hall and a guard walked in quickly. Master, several magisters have arrived. Illyrio Mapades let out a soft sigh. Invite them in. Long after, several magisters dressed in luxurious clothing walked into the hall. Their expressions varied. Some were panicked, some angry, and others full of suspicion. As soon as they sat down, one of the magisters with a goatee spoke first. Illyrio Mapades, there is still time to turn back. Hand over that girl. Drogo only wants her. Hall suddenly fell silent. Daenerys' body trembled slightly. Illyrio Mapades did not speak but instead looked at Jon. Everyone's gaze followed, landing on the young man. Jon was not angry. After all, Pentos was in this position because of Daenerys. He was silent for a moment, then slowly spoke. Today you hand over Daenerys. Tomorrow Drogo will demand gold from you. The day after, he will demand more slaves, and after that, he looked at the magisters with a calm gaze. It will be your wives, your daughters. The hall fell into a deathly silence. No one refuted him because everyone knew he spoke the truth. The Dothraki's plundering would never stop. That goatee-wearing magister opened his mouth but in the end remained silent. Jorah looked at Jon, a hint of approval in his eyes. Just then boom, a dull sound suddenly came from outside the estate and the entire hall shook slightly. Everyone looked up at once. Another deafening roar descended from the sky. Scree, the massive dragon roar shook the entire estate. All the magisters' faces changed, and some even stood up subconsciously. The next moment a shadow swept past the hall window, and a pair of massive snow-white dragon wings slowly glided across the sky. Coldfire had returned. She spread her wings and circled the estate before landing slowly. Boom, the ground shook slightly. She held a massive wild ox in her jaws. With a light flick of her head with a thud, the entire ox was tossed into the courtyard, and blood began to flow slowly across the stone slabs. Several magisters' faces turned pale instantly. One of them even took 2 steps back involuntarily. It was their first time seeing a real dragon up close, not a legend, not a mural, but a truly living giant beast. Coldfire slowly raised her head, her amethyst-like slit pupils sweeping across the crowd before finally landing on Jon. She let out a low cry. Yuru, the sound was noticeably softer. Jon walked out of the hall to her. Coldfire voluntarily lowered her head, gently pressing her forehead against his shoulder. Jon stroked her cold, hard scales. Coldfire squinted her eyes in comfort, emitting a low, purring sound. Gyurulu. No one in the hall dared to speak. Only at this moment did they truly realize that the young man before them was not interacting with them based on his family status, but possessed the true power to change the course of the war. After returning to the hall, no one proposed handing over deaneries again. The meeting lasted a long time. The map was spread out again and again. Signalmen were stationed in the towers, and guards at the south gate were increased, with orders to ring the bell tower the moment the Dothraki were spotted. By the time all arrangements were finished, night had fallen. The other magisters left one after another and the hall returned to silence. The shadow of war like an invisible net slowly descended over the entire city of Pentos. Chapter 42. Prelude. The night passed exceptionally quickly. The moon rose and slowly sank into the west. As the first rays of dawn crossed the walls of Pentos, the entire city seemed to catch the scent of the approaching storm. The streets were much quieter than usual and the air was filled with a suffocating tension. Jon had hardly slept all night. He lay in bed with his eyes closed, yet he could never truly fall asleep. In his mind he constantly simulated everything that might happen today: the range of the dragonfire, the charge speed of the Dothraki cavalry, the angle of Coldfire's dive, the shifts in wind direction, the retreat routes. Not until the sky outside the window began to pale did he slowly sit up. Today there was no turning back. He washed his face, letting the cold water chase away the last traces of drowsiness, then began to silently put on his gear. Underneath it all was a light yet sturdy suit of chainmail. This was the armor he had brought with him when he left the north. It wasn't heavy, but it was enough to deflect the slashes of ordinary swords. Over the chainmail he donned a thick wolfskin cloak, the fur of Winterfell. Wearing it in the sweltering heat of Pentos was nothing short of self-torture, but the dense animal hide could at least weaken the impact of arrows. Even if it couldn't stop them entirely, it might buy him a moment to react. Finally he slung Longclaw diagonally across his back. The cold hilt settled into his palm and the familiar sensation helped his chaotic mind slowly calm down. It was his most reliable companion. A light knock sounded at the door. Grace. In. Door opened slowly and Jorah walked in. The knight had already changed into his chainmail, a gray-green cloak hanging behind him with a long sword at his waist, his expression steady and solemn. His gaze swept across the room and finally landed on Jon. The horses are ready, Jon nodded. What about Illyrio Mopatis and the others? They are waiting outside. Jon acknowledged this and the room fell silent again. A moment later Jorah spoke. Are you nervous, Your Grace? Jon did not deny it. A little. Jorah's lips moved as if he wanted to say something but he swallowed it back in the end. He fell silent again, standing quietly with his right hand resting on his sword hilt as if waiting for the order to march. Jon glanced at him. This knight from Bear Island was still as reticent as when they had first met, almost never saying a word more than necessary. He didn't say anything more, just adjusted his cloak. Let's go, Your Grace. Two walked out of the room, one after the other. There were far fewer servants in the mansion than usual. Most of them had been arranged to evacuate by Illyrio Mopatis last night. Those who remained moved with extra care, shuttling back and forth cautiously while carrying things. No one spoke loudly, as if a sound slightly too large would awaken the war on the distant grasslands ahead of time. The two made their way to the stables. The horses clearly sensed something was wrong, snorting uneasily and pawing at the ground from time to time. As Jorah adjusted the reins of his mount, he spoke. I will escort you to the northern hills. Once you mount Coldfire, I will immediately return to Pentos. The city gates need someone to command them. Jon had arranged for Coldfire to be stationed on the hills outside the city last night. Keeping the dragon in the city would only cause panic. Jon could handle ordinary enemies himself. When a critical moment truly arrived, he could summon Coldfire instantly by calling out through the bond of blood and dragon in his heart. Jon nodded. I know. After a moment of silence, he suddenly spoke. Jorah. The knight looked up. Jon looked at him, his expression grave. I have an order for you. If anything goes wrong today, do not worry about me. Your primary mission is to protect Daenerys. Jorah nodded silently. Find Coldfire and take Dany to her. She recognizes Dany's scent and will accept her. If I truly don't make it back, she will accept a new rider. He paused here, lowering his voice further. And one more thing, no matter what happens, you must never let Viserys get a hold of Coldfire. Even if, he slowly raised his eyes, his gaze calm yet sharp, even if it means killing him. Air froze instantly. Jorah gripped his sword hilt, his knuckles turning slightly white. He was silent for a long time, recalling Viserys' irritability, arrogance, and incompetence, and then thinking of Jon's sense of responsibility and composure over these past days. Finally he bowed his head solemnly, his voice without a hint of hesitation. As you command, your grace. Jon knew that, at least in this moment, this knight from Bear Island truly accepted him. Not because of the Targaryen name, but because of the boy before him who was willing to face an entire colossal alone. Just then, the sound of footsteps came from the other side of the courtyard. Illyrio Mopatis was walking over slowly, accompanied by Daenerys and Viserys. The fat magister had rarely foregone his ornate silk robes today, having changed into a dark, practical tunic for movement. His forehead was covered in sweat. It was unclear whether it was from the heat or from nervousness. As for Viserys, his face was even gloomier than yesterday, constantly glancing toward the south of the city, his fingertips clenched white. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about fleeing, but the guards sent by Illyrio Mopatis wouldn't leave his side for a moment. He simply couldn't find a chance to slip away. Daenerys walked quietly at the rear. She was wearing a light blue dress today, her silver gold hair cascading behind her shoulders. When her gaze fell on Jon, the worry in her eyes could not be hidden. Her lips moved, but in the end she dared not speak in front of everyone. Their gazes met across a dozen paces, and neither spoke immediately, just watching each other quietly. Illyrio Mopatis broke the silence first. He tried hard to squeeze out a smile, but it looked worse than crying. Your Grace, while we have a moment, I must speak the truth to you. He spread his hands and gave a bitter laugh. What you are going to do today, in my opinion, is complete madness. Jon was taken aback for a moment, but the next instant he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Perhaps it was because he had been wound too tight, or perhaps this blunt remark had actually made him breathe a sigh of relief. Illyrio Mopatis watched his smile and couldn't help but shake his head, the fat on his face trembling slightly. It seems we are of the same mind. He was silent for a moment, then bowed solemnly, performing a formal gesture of respect reserved for a future monarch. I wish you victory, your grace. This was the first time this Magister of Pentos had not been testing him, not calculating interests, but had placed his bet entirely on the boy before him. Jon did not stop him, only gave a slight nod. Afterward he shifted his gaze to the side. Viserys was standing there, his silver gold hair fluttering in the morning breeze, his eyes full of unwillingness and resentment. Even now he still believed all of this could have been avoided. If only Dany had married Drogo, if only Jon hadn't returned, nothing would have happened. Jon looked at him calmly. I know you hate me, it doesn't matter. When the war is over you will understand. We have absolutely no need to trade a Targaryen princess for a colossal. He slowly raised his eyes, his tone calm yet carrying the weight of 1,000 pounds. The true power that belongs to House Targaryen has never been marriage alliances, but dragons. Viserys' lips moved, but in the end he said nothing, only glaring coldly at Jon, the anger and jealousy in his eyes almost overflowing. As if all the danger before them was entirely caused by this boy. Jon did not continue to explain, it was meaningless. When the war ended, everything would have its own answer. He looked at Dany one last time and gave a slight nod. It was like a comfort and also like a promise. Immediately he swung onto his horse, pulled the reins, turned the horse around and galloped toward the hills north of the city. Jorah immediately spurred his horse to follow. The morning breeze caught the edges of his wolfskin cloak and Longclaw swayed gently behind him. The distant grasslands were calm and silent, but everyone knew a storm was coming. Chapter 43. The war begins. Daenerys remained silent, walking slowly to the window and gazing into the distance. The morning sun was inching over the horizon, casting golden light across the entire grassland. A gentle breeze swept through the rolling green grass, making the vast land as beautiful as a serene painting. Yet she knew that before long this place would be engulfed in raging flames, and countless lives would vanish in the fires of war. She felt as if all of this was caused by her. If not for her, perhaps Drogo would not have led his colossal south, and Pentos would not be facing this war. A soft sound of footsteps came from behind. Jon slowly approached her side and gazed at the same grassland with her. The two remained silent for a long time, neither breaking the stillness until Daenerys spoke softly. Do not wish for anyone to die because of me. Jon was silent for a moment, his voice exceptionally calm. The war did not start because of you. The Dothraki would have gone south to pillage sooner or later. Even without you today, they would eventually have come, wielding their blades for wealth. Slaves and land. He paused, then continued. I cannot stop the war, but I will minimize the casualties as much as possible. Daenerys slowly turned her head, her violet eyes shimmering with a faint layer of moisture. I am not afraid of war. I am only afraid that you won't come back. Jon did not answer, simply taking her cool, small hand gently and pulling her slowly into his embrace. The young woman trembled slightly, then reached out her arms to hold him tightly. as if this was the only way to dispel the unease in her heart. A breeze passed through the open window, gently brushing their clothes and making the entire hall exceptionally quiet. After a long while, Jon slowly released the young woman from his arms, lowered his head, and pressed a gentle kiss to her smooth forehead. "Wait for me to return." Daenerys looked at the young man before her, his figure reflected in her eyes. She nodded gently, her voice trembling slightly yet firmer than ever before. "I will wait for you." Jon did not linger, heading north against the morning wind. His cloak snapped loudly in the breeze. As he neared the hill, a familiar and long dragon roar echoed. Coldfare had already sensed his arrival. The massive white dragon slowly rose from the mountaintop, her pristine white wings unfurling against the morning sun like a snow cloud covering the sky. She lowered her slender dragon head, her purple-slit pupils watching the approaching youth quietly, then emitted a low, affectionate cry. "Grrr, roar!" Jon dismounted and reached out, placing his hand gently on Coldfire's warm, hard snout. Man and dragon locked eyes for a moment. No words were needed. They both knew that today would be Coldfire's first real battle, and it was time to announce to the world once more: dragons have returned. The sea of grass churned, undulating in the wind like a green tide. Thousands of warhorses thundered past, their iron hooves striking the earth heavily, creating a thunderous roar that made the entire plain tremble, as if the very ground itself were afraid. Khal Drogo rode the tallest red warhorse. He was burly, with long black braids falling to his thighs, adorned with countless small copper bells at the tips. As the horse galloped, the trophies on his body collided, creating a crisp and rhythmic sound. This sound had accompanied him as he conquered one enemy after another, never ceasing. He had yet to taste the flavor of defeat. Behind him was the most powerful and fearsome colossal in the entire Dothraki Sea. The force accompanying him today was merely 10,000 elite cavalry. For attacking a free city with no standing army, such numbers were more than enough, sufficient to crush everything into dust. Yet Khal Drogo's expression remained as grim as iron. Even now, he could not understand how a young man, reportedly only in his teens, dared to openly defy the will of a Khal, and even more audaciously steal the woman who rightfully belonged to him. This was not just a provocation, it was the most vile and intolerable insult to his dignity. And for all those who had ever insulted Khal Drogo, there was only one final fate: death. The tall, thick walls of Pentos gradually came into view. The cavalry let out excited, savage shouts. Some brandished sharp air-axe high in the air, while others whipped their mounts fiercely, urging them to run faster. It had been a long time since they had conducted a raid of such scale. Wealth, women, glory, blood, everything they craved was waiting behind those walls for them to seize. Khal Drogo slowly drew his arak, the blade flashing with a blinding cold glint under the morning light. The next moment, the entire colossal erupted into a deafening war cry. "Ha! Ha! Ha!" The roar of 10,000 men coalesced into a wave of sound like a surging tide, sweeping across the entire grassland and spreading far and wide, as if to shake the very sky. In the distance, the alarm bells on the walls of Pentos began to ring slowly. 1, 2, 3, heavy and urgent. A scornful sneer curled the corner of Khal Drogo's mouth. It was merely a death struggle. This seemingly sturdy city could not stop his torrent of iron cavalry. Yet, the very moment the third bell toll fell silent, the world suddenly grew eerily quiet, as if even the wind had ceased to blow. Then an unprecedented, soul-shaking roar rolled in from the northern horizon. Scree! The sound was high-pitched and long, carrying an ancient pressure, as if a sleeping giant beast had awakened, or as if the entire sky had been torn apart by some invisible, massive force. The warhorses were the first to react instinctively. The mounts that had been galloping wildly suddenly let out terrified neighs, rearing high onto their hind legs. Some stopped dead in their tracks, hooves planted firmly in the ground, refusing to take another step forward no matter how much their masters whipped or kicked them. Khal Drogo jerked his head up, his gaze sharp as lightning. High above in the sky, a massive pure white shadow glided slowly past. Then a pair of wings that blotted out the sun unfurled completely, instantly blocking the sunlight and plunging the earth into sudden darkness. It was a colossal beast covered entirely in snow-white dragon scales. She circled high above, elegant yet filled with oppressive power. Her long, ferocious dragon head dipped slightly, and her pair of purple-slit pupils gazed quietly at everything below, as if a supreme monarch were surveying her territory. She did not attack, simply circling in the sky. Her wings stirred up gales that swept across the battlefield again and again, and a bone-deep fear began to spread. Chapter 44. Crushing blow. The entire colossal gradually quieted down. Countless cavalrymen involuntarily raised their heads, staring blankly at the sky. Some had hands gripping their reins, trembling violently, while others subconsciously swallowed hard, their Adam's apples bobbing. In their entire lives, they had never seen a behemoth like this. Those terrifying monsters that only existed in ancient songs and legends should have vanished into the long river of history along with the fall of Valyria. Yet now it hovered alive above their heads, looking down at this group of surrogate raiders. Drogo merely frowned. Although scouts had gathered information about the dragon, he had not paid it any mind. But now, for the first time, a true wavering appeared in his heart, not out of fear, but because of this completely unknown, unimaginable power. This was not the war he was familiar with. It was not a charge of 10,000 horses, not a slaughter of clashing blades, but an overwhelming existence that transcended the scope of human understanding. Just at this moment, he finally saw clearly the figure on the back of that giant dragon. The knight sat steadily between the dragon's neck, his black cloak flapping violently in the gale. The morning light spilled onto his young but exceptionally calm face, devoid of even a ripple of emotion. The youth on the dragon's back quietly overlooked the entire battlefield, and Drogo finally recognized that young face. It was the very young man who had rejected him. Aegon Targaryen. Drogo's pupils constricted violently, but the next moment an overwhelming rage completely crushed all reason. He abruptly raised his arak high and roared in a murderous Dothraki. "Continue the charge, he only has one dragon, we have 10,000 men, target Pentos." After a brief moment of panic, the colossal erupted again with violent war cries. The cavalrymen spurred their horses fiercely once more, attempting to push forward. However, the white giant dragon in the sky finally moved. She slowly folded her sky-covering giant wings, her entire massive body almost turning into a streak of snow-white light diving down from high altitude. The air was torn apart by the extreme speed, emitting ear-piercing, sharp sonic booms. Boom! She did not breathe dragon fire immediately, but instead swept closely over the top of the cavalry formation. Her massive wings kicked up violently turbulent air currents, sending countless sand and dust soaring into the sky, blotting out the sun. The warhorses let out even more terrified screams. Masses of mounts completely lost control. Some threw their riders directly to the ground, some turned and fled frantically, and others crashed heavily into the formations of their companions. The originally orderly and stern vanguard formation instantly fell into chaos, collapsing entirely. Coldfire had already swept past, not looking back, not even considering this army that had once swept across the plains worthy of notice. Only the youth on the dragon's back slowly turned his head, looking down at the colossal that had fallen into chaos, his expression extremely calm, devoid of joy or pity. He simply slowly raised his right hand, and in cold, clear high Valyrian his voice slowly resonated from the sky. "Dracarys!" The next instant, the scorching white dragonfire descended with a roar like a collapsing heavenly river, devouring everything. The dragonfire did not stop there. Coldfire flapped her wings and climbed, her snow-white wings kicking up scorching air currents, tracing an elegant yet dangerous arc in the sky. Jon looked down at the entire battlefield below. The first round of dragonfire had forcibly torn a huge charred gap in the center of the colossal. The scorched earth was still burning fiercely, thick smoke rising in billows. Corpses of men and horses mixed together while others fled in all directions, their screams endless. What truly disintegrated the colossal was not the dragonfire, but fear. The Dothraki dared to charge against enemies several times their number, but they had never faced a giant dragon. When Coldfire swept across the sky, the first to collapse were not the cavalrymen but the warhorses beneath them that had endured countless wars. But they had never faced a true giant dragon, and Coldfire in the sky had completely exceeded their entire understanding of war. More and more warhorses began to collapse completely. They fearfully reared their front hooves and kept retreating, and no matter how their masters whipped or cursed them, they would not willingly approach that white shadow of death even one step closer. Drogo let out a deafening roar, raised his curved blade high, and continuously issued various orders into Dothraki. 6 loyal bloodriders were the first to spur their horses out, desperately trying to regroup the scattered cavalrymen amidst the chaotic crowd. In just a moment's time, the team that had originally been fleeing in all directions miraculously recovered some semblance of order. This Khal, who had never known defeat, finally displayed his true command ability and iron will at this moment. They did not continue to blindly charge toward the walls of Pentos. All the gazes of the thousands of cavalrymen were cast simultaneously toward the white giant dragon in the sky. Short bows were quickly unslung, bowstrings pulled until they creaked. Drogo abruptly swung his curved blade down. The next instant countless arrows soared into the sky, dense and numerous, like a black cloud of death blotting out the sky. Above the walls of Pentos, many guards subconsciously held their breath. Illyrio Mopades gripped the battlements tightly, veins bulging on the back of his hands. Daenerys gazed at the sky, her face pale as paper, her hands gripping until they turned white without her realizing it. She knew Coldfire's scales were impenetrable, but the youth on the dragon's back was only flesh and blood. Jon in the sky merely glanced calmly below, neither panicked nor the slightest bit impatient. He gently patted Coldfire's snow-white dragon neck. Coldfire let out a high and long dragon roar, her wings unfurled abruptly, and her massive body quickly climbed using the updraft. The rain of arrows swept past, almost grazing her tail feathers. When those arrows reached their highest point and lost their power, they fell back onto the plains, many of them even falling back into the ranks of the Dothraki themselves, triggering a new round of exclamations and screams. Jon looked down, his expression still calm as water. They react quickly. His voice was very light. "Unfortunately, it is far from enough. He raised his right hand again and high Valyrian resonated through the sky. Sovs, Coldfire immediately folded her wings, her massive dragon body turned into a streak of snow-white light, diving down from high altitude, the wind whistling like blades in her ears, the air being torn apart at extreme speed. Drogo's expression changed drastically. For the first time he felt that this war had slipped out of his control. The truly terrifying aspect of this giant dragon was not just its destructive fire, but also its horrifying speed and maneuverability. Scatter, he roared and swung his blade, but the order came too late after all. Coldfire had already charged into the sky above the cavalry formation, and when she was over a dozen yards from the ground, Jon's voice sounded again without the slightest ripple of emotion. Boom! The second stream of snow-white dragonfire, like a torrent of destruction spanning the entire plain, swept through the center of the cavalry. Wherever it passed, men and horses were incinerated, and the grassland instantly turned into scorched earth. The second strip of fire once again completely severed the entire colossal. Rolling heat waves rushed toward them. Even from several miles away, the defenders on the walls of Pentos could still clearly feel that suffocating heat. Coldfire did not pause. She swept low over the enemy formation, her thick, powerful dragon tail suddenly sweeping out horizontally. Dull and massive impact sounds rang out one after another, as more than 10 cavalrymen along with their warhorses were swiped away, tumbling and screaming in midair before falling into the raging sea of fire below. Immediately afterward, she flapped her wings and ascended again, her massive shadow slowly sweeping across the entire battlefield. There was no unnecessary pursuit, no angry roars, just circling quietly like this, yet it had already caused the thousands of Dothraki cavalrymen below to completely lose the courage to continue advancing. Jon gripped the dragon's saddle, slowly looking toward the distant Khal Drogo. Their eyes met, one standing on the blood-stained plains, the other standing at the pinnacle of the firmament. Jon slowly raised his right hand. Coldfire opened her mouth. Chapter 45. A river of blood. Dragonfire did not break Drogo, at least not immediately. Under the Khal's roar, the surviving cavalry regrouped. Hundreds of the most elite warriors followed Drogo forward, while 6 bloodriders remained constantly at his side to guard him. Battle cry rang out from the crowd once more. Although it was no longer as orderly, imposing, or earth-shattering as before, it carried a near-suicidal madness and tragic heroism. Khal Drogo took the lead, commanding the hundreds of regrouped elite cavalry as they pushed forward with all their might toward the city of Pentos. His bloodriders followed closely behind, using their own bodies to form a barrier of flesh and blood, attempting to carve out even a narrow path forward for their Khal. They knew this might be their last chance. If even the Khal were to fall, their honor would be reduced completely to ashes. Meanwhile, Coldfire circled high above with elegance and an overwhelming sense of oppression. Jon sat between the dragon's neck, overlooking the entire chaotic battlefield below. His black cloak snapped in the wind, and there was not a trace of panic on his young face, only a calmness that surpassed his age. He did not immediately launch a second large-scale dragonfire attack, choosing instead a more cruel and efficient tactic of sustained suppression. The white dragon swooped down from the sky time and time again, stirring up violently turbulent air currents as she passed low, repeatedly scattering the cavalry attempting to reform their ranks and sending men and horses tumbling. Occasionally, she would spew a short but incredibly precise burst of dragonfire from her massive jaws, leaving scorching, blazing lines of fire across the vast grasslands, cutting the entire Khalasar's formation into smaller and smaller fragments, making it impossible for them to form an effective charging formation. The Dothraki began to pay an increasingly heavy price. To protect Drogo, one of the most loyal bloodriders was struck directly by the dragon's thick tail as she swept past at a low altitude. His entire body, along with his warhorse, flew a dozen meters away before slamming heavily onto the charred earth, where he died instantly, his blood staining a large patch of ground red. Another bloodrider was grazed by the edge of the dragonfire, half his body instantly turning into charcoal. The excruciating pain forced a heart-wrenching scream from him, yet even before death, he used his last ounce of strength to shout the Khal's name. The sound was shrill and tragic, echoing for a long time over the grasslands, leaving the surrounding warriors both terrified and filled with grief and indignation. Khal Drogo's eyes were completely bloodshot. He brandished his arak incessantly, urging his men to charge forward, while the countless copper bells hanging from the ends of his braids clashed wildly as he ran, creating a harsh and chaotic sound. That crisp sound, which once symbolized victory and glory, now seemed exceptionally shrill and ironic amidst the sky-filling flames, thick smoke, and rising screams, as if mocking the collapse of a once invincible legend. Every swoop of Coldfire was precise and deadly. She did not seek maximum slaughter, but rather, like an experienced sheepdog herding a flock, she repeatedly scattered, drove, and separated the cavalry attempting to regroup. Coldfire swooped again. A gale sweeping across the grasslands, and the cavalry that had just gathered were scattered once more. Jon was in no rush to end the battle. He did not want a massacre. He wanted a victory sufficient to shock all of Essos. The screams on the battlefield, the panicked neighing of horses, the crackling of burning flames, and the heavy scent of blood and charred flesh mingled together, drifting on the wind toward the distant walls of Pentos. Waves of heat washed over them, and even from a great distance, the defenders on the ramparts could feel the suffocating intensity. On the ramparts, the defenders were already dumbfounded, many even forgetting to breathe. Magister Illyrio's fat body trembled slightly, but an uncontrollable look of ecstasy gradually appeared on his face. His eyes were fixed intently on the white dragon in the sky, as if he saw the future hope of Pentos and his own glory. Daenerys gripped the battlements tightly, her knuckles turning white from the exertion. She dared not take her purple eyes off the white figure in the sky for even a moment, her heart nearly leaping out of her chest. Every time the dragonfire fell, it left her both terrified and filled with hope, and she prayed silently in her heart for Jon. On the other side of the ramparts, Ser Jorah Mormont, clad in chainmail with his hand on his sword hilt, directed the defenders in a steady and firm voice. All archers to the south wall. First rank prepare to fire, second rank follow up and knock arrows. Do not waste a single arrow, wait until they are truly within effective range before firing. City gate guards, increase vigilance, report immediately if there is a breakthrough. As he issued orders decisively, he personally inspected the defensive arrangements at the city gate, his eyes sharp and focused. Although they were facing the legendary and incredibly fierce Dothraki cavalry, he still fulfilled his duty with the bearing of a battle-hardened knight, protecting Princess Daenerys and remaining loyal to that young dragon rider. Although Khal Drogo's colossal was still resisting tenaciously, everyone on the battlefield knew that this iron cavalry, which had once swept across the Dothraki Sea and been unrivaled, was beginning to teeter on the edge of total collapse. Thick smoke billowed, flames raged, and the entire grassland echoed with a symphony of death, fear, and despair. The distant walls of Pentos appeared exceptionally sturdy under the sunlight, yet also appeared exceptionally small. At this moment, everyone understood that the scales of war had completely tipped toward the youth riding on the back of the dragon. The clash of flames and arrow rain lasted for nearly half an hour. The Khalasar's resistance grew weaker and weaker, and more cavalrymen began to retreat involuntarily, not daring to approach the area of the battlefield that had been repeatedly scorched by dragonfire and turned into scorched earth. The ground was covered with charred marks, scattered weapons, and unextinguished fires. Waves of heat rolled through the air, carrying the heavy scent of blood and charred flesh. Khal Drogo finally made a decision that caught everyone by surprise. Drogo yanked his warhorse to a halt and raised his arak high. He roared with all his might. "Dragon rider, come down, fight me! If you are a true warrior, do not hide behind the dragon's back." The entire battlefield went quiet. Countless eyes turned toward the sky. Daenerys and the others on the ramparts also held their breath involuntarily. Everyone was waiting. Waiting for the young dragon rider's answer. And Jon in the sky simply lowered his head slowly to look at Drogo. Then he gently patted Coldfire's snow-white dragon neck. Chapter 46. The duel. Jon looked at Drogo. He knew that dragons could conquer fear, but only a sword could conquer these people of the plains. Jon vaulted off the dragon's back, his black cloak snapping in the wind. "Retreat to the hills behind," he said, gently patting the dragon's neck. Coldfire let out a low hiss and slowly descended onto a clearing in the center of the battlefield. He slowly drew his longsword, the blade shimmering with a cold, piercing light in the sunlight, and walked toward Drogo step by step. "As you wish." Jon's voice was calm yet clearly carried across the entire battlefield. "I accept your challenge." Drogo dismounted voluntarily. The two were less than 30 paces apart. The surrounding remnants of the cavalry and the defenders on the city walls held their breath. The entire battlefield seemed to fall into absolute silence at that moment, leaving only the low whistle of the wind over the scorched earth and the crackling of distant fires. The duel erupted without warning in the next instant. Drogo, like a raging lion, rushed forward brandishing his arak. Every slash carried terrifying power. The wind of the blade whistled swift as thunder. His offense was fierce and domineering, filled with the wildness and fury of a warrior of the plains. Every strike was delivered with full force, attempting to crush his opponent with absolute power, but Jon's response was entirely different. His swordsmanship was sharp, crisp, and direct with no unnecessary flourishes. Every strike aimed straight for a vital point, heavy and swift. When the longsword clashed with the arak, it produced a deafening metallic ring, sending sparks flying everywhere. Jon's stance was steady and agile. He did not retreat a single step. Instead, he actively met Drogo's fierce assault. Every parry was incredibly precise, neutralizing Drogo's full-force strikes completely, followed immediately by a counterattack. The blade thrust directly at Drogo's opening, its power so great that Drogo's arm went numb and the webbing between his thumb and forefinger split. After a dozen moves, Drogo's movements began to show obvious sluggishness. Sweat mixed with blood dripped continuously from his bronze skin, staining the scorched earth beneath his feet red. His breathing grew heavier and heavier, and his offense gradually became chaotic. Jon seized a fleeting gap, his longsword thrusting out like lightning, grazing Drogo's breastplate and leaving a bleeding wound on his body. Blood gushed out instantly, running down Drogo's chest and dripping onto the scorched earth. Drogo let out a deafening roar, but his counterattack was met by a heavy, powerful blow from Jon's sword against his blade. The immense force caused Drogo to stagger back several steps, his arak nearly slipping from his hand. The scorched earth beneath their feet was soaked with blood. Every time their weapons clashed, dazzling sparks erupted. Drogo's arak slashed down again and again with whistling force, his strikes becoming increasingly frenzied, like a wounded beast making a final, desperate struggle. Jon, however, remained calm throughout, parrying, deflecting, or counterattacking with precision. Every step was perfectly measured, without a hint of panic. Yet Drogo was, after all, a khal who had roamed the Dothraki Sea for many years. During another violent clash, he roared and forcibly twisted his blade, the sharp arak grazing past Jon's body. SSH, the black cloak along with the fabric on his shoulder was sliced open with a long tear, and fragments of cloth scattered in the wind. Jon used the momentum to step back half a pace, avoiding the strike. His shoulder was unharmed, but his eyes grew even more solemn. The continuous, high-intensity engagement finally caused his breathing to lose the steadiness it had at the start. His chest rose and fell slightly, and fine beads of sweat seeped from his forehead. He slowly exhaled a breath, gripped his longsword tightly again, his deep gray eyes calm as ice without the slightest waver. Drogo's situation, however, was far worse. His shoulders, arms, and thighs were already covered in wounds, blood dripping constantly. His heavy breathing was as rapid as a bellows, and every swing of his blade was a fraction slower than the last, his strength rapidly fading. Yet he still gritted his teeth, letting out a beast-like roar, attempting to turn the tide of defeat with a final frenzy. Finally, Jon executed an incredibly swift sidestep, dodging Drogo's all-out sweep, and then thrust his longsword out like a thunderbolt, the tip resting firmly against Drogo's throat. Drogo's arak flew from his hand, embedding heavily into the scorched earth, unable to be held any longer. He gasped for air, looking up at the man before him, who was much younger than himself. For the first time, true awe and extremely complex emotions appeared in his eyes. Then he slowly drew a small knife, the bells jingled softly. He did not say a word, the knife fell and his long braid dropped. "I call Drogo, concede." His voice was hoarse, yet it still carried the final dignity of a warrior of the plains. He finally understood that the man before him not only possessed a dragon but also a sword worthy of one. Jon slowly sheathed his sword. Standing upon the scorched earth, his black cloak snapped in the wind and the setting sun cast a long shadow of his figure. He stood quietly in the center of the scorched earth, his longsword hanging at his side. Not far away, Coldfire let out a low, majestic dragon roar. At this moment, whether it was the defenders of Pentos or the cavalry of the Dothraki Sea, all remembered that name, Aegon Targaryen. The moment Drogo cut his braid, the entire battlefield fell into dead silence. A moment later, the remaining Dothraki cavalry dismounted one after another, plunging their araks into the scorched earth. "Go," Jon said calmly. "Return to your people." He chose not to kill Drogo. A defeated khal who remained alive was far more valuable than a corpse. He would return to the Dothraki Sea bearing the weight of today's defeat and would spread the name of the Dragonrider throughout every colossal. As long as Drogo lived, no one would be able to forget this victory. Coldfire slowly lowered its massive body, folding its wings. Jon climbed back onto the dragon's back. The other cavalrymen looked at their khal with no hint of insult in their eyes. Although his braid was cut and the bells symbolizing his honor were gone, it did not diminish their respect in the slightest. Losing to such an enemy brought them no shame. Drogo watched the dragon pass, mounted his horse, and after gruffly ordering the wounded to be treated, led his men back to the Dothraki Sea. He hoped never to see Targaryen and his dragon again. Coldfire raised its long, slender neck, let out a high-pitched, long cry, flapped its wings, and soared into the sky, circling slowly above the battlefield. The massive white figure swept across the horizon, as if declaring the ownership of this victory to the entire world. Inside Pentos, cheers erupted like a tidal wave. When the defenders on the walls confirmed that the Dothraki had begun to retreat, the heavy city gates, which had been closed for so long, finally opened slowly. Illyrio Mepades hurried out with a group of attendants, and Daenerys rushed toward the battlefield regardless of everything. Jorah Mormont followed closely behind, scanning the surroundings vigilantly until he confirmed there was no more danger, at which point he breathed a slight sigh of relief. Daenerys was the first to reach Jon, who had just landed. Her eyes were already red, crystalline tears welling up within them. In the next moment, she could no longer suppress the emotions in her heart, throwing herself into Jon's arms and hugging him tightly. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with a sob. "You really did it. I knew it. I knew you would come back safely." Illyrio Mepades wiped the sweat from his forehead, unable to hide the smile on his face. "Your Grace," he took a deep breath, his tone excited. "Pentos will always be your most steadfast ally. From this day forth, whether it be the free cities or the vast Dothraki Sea, all will know of this war." Setting sun slowly sank below the horizon, and the blood-red afterglow covered the entire plain. On the scorched earth, embers were still burning. The white dragon circled in the sky, emitting a long, majestic roar. In the distance, in the city of Pentos, the cheers did not cease for a long time. And the story of this duel and the name of the dragon rider Aegon Targaryen began from that moment to spread across both sides of the narrow sea, carried by merchant ships, songs, and travelers. Chapter 47. The name of the dragon rider Pentos was in a state of absolute fervor. From the south city gate to the harbor, from the squares to the markets, cheering crowds were everywhere. Taverns served free wine, bakers distributed freshly baked black bread to the citizens, and children waved crude white dragon banners, shouting the same name in every street and alley. By the fountains improvised new ballads, singing of the white dragon descending from the sky, of dragonfire consuming the grass sea, and of the young Targaryen who rode the great dragon to defeat the arrogant Khal Drogo before the eyes of all. Some said that the burning grasslands looked like a sea of white fire, while others claimed that from that day on the sky once again belonged to the dragons. Regardless, everyone had come to one conclusion: Pentos was saved, and it was all because of the dragon rider who rode the white dragon. Compared to the clamor in the city, the Magister's council chamber was quiet, almost oppressively so. The heavy oak doors slowly closed, completely shutting out the cheers from outside. On both sides of the long table, over 20 Magisters and officials were all present. Wine goblets sat before everyone, yet almost no one raised them. Shock, joy, apprehension, and undisguised greed were intertwined on every face. Illyrio Mapati sat down slowly, still feeling as if he were in a dream. Until yesterday, his greatest wish had been no more than preserving Pentos, protecting his own wealth, and incidentally completing that political investment. But now everything had changed. The power of the dragon was far more terrifying than he had imagined. Gentlemen. Illyrio Mapati spoke first, his voice still suppressing an irrepressible excitement. Pentos owes that dragon rider a mountain of gold. As soon as he finished speaking, an elderly man with graying hair tapped lightly on the table. Do not think so. Everyone's gaze immediately converged upon him. The old man's expression was calm, but his tone was very direct. If it weren't for Aegon Targaryen stopping that Targaryen girl from marrying Khal Drogo, this war would never have happened. Our farmlands would not have been burned, the city gates would not have been closed, and the entire city would not have fallen into panic. It was he who brought war to Pentos. Many nodded slightly. For merchants, they always calculated losses first. I disagree. Another tall, thin official leaned forward slightly and slowly scanned the crowd. Would sending that girl to Khal Drogo really have bought us peace? Have you all forgot? In the past few decades, have the Dothraki not raided Pentos enough times? Today they demand a princess. Tomorrow it might be gold, the next day grain, slaves, or even the entire city. No one spoke in the hall for a moment, and even the old man frowned, not immediately refuting him. The tall, thin official continued. The Dothraki never honor contracts, they only believe in strength. What truly made Khal Drogo retreat was not the marriage contract, but power. Today, the reason Pentos can still sit here and discuss this is because of the person who stood before the city gates riding a white dragon. This time many nodded slowly. Another Magister said in a deep voice, "Without him we would already be in ruins. Khal Drogo's colossal would have sacked the entire city, and all of our wealth would have become spoils for the Dothraki." Several others echoed this sentiment. Just then, a fat Magister who had remained silent on the other side spoke slowly. "No." He crossed his fingers and looked calmly at everyone. "What we should really be thinking about is not how to thank him." Everyone's gaze fell upon him once again, but rather how we should face someone who possesses a dragon. Hall instantly fell silent. "What do you mean?" someone asked in a low voice. "Meaning is simple," man said slowly. "Yesterday he could save Pentos, and tomorrow he could destroy Pentos." No one answered, because everyone knew the answer clearly in their hearts. Yesterday's battle had proven everything. Thousands of Dothraki riders were annihilated in an instant. If dragonfire were to land on the walls of Pentos, those stones would certainly be no sturdier than the flesh and blood of the Grasslanders. The silence lasted for a long time. Another person spoke slowly. "Then we should win him over. Gold, land, mansions, merchant ships. As long as he needs it, we can give it, provided he is willing to stay in Pentos." Another person immediately retorted, "Dragons do not belong to any city." Hall fell silent again, and everyone's gaze fell, without exception, upon Illyrio Mapati's. After all, that dragon rider was currently staying at his estate. Illyrio Mapati slowly picked up his wine goblet but did not drink from it. After a moment he said slowly, "We have no right to command the dragon rider. The only thing we can do is become his friend, not his enemy." Several Magisters nodded slowly. These words undoubtedly struck at the heart of the matter. Someone capable of controlling a great dragon was in themselves a force that could not be ignored. Any conspiracy or scheme seemed pale and powerless in the face of absolute strength. The goateed Magister asked in a deep voice, "Then what is our decision?" Illyrio Mapati put down his goblet and said slowly, "Publicly announce that Pentos will always welcome Aegon Targaryen, grant him the highest honors, and open our ports, warehouses, and markets to him. As long as he needs it, we will provide as much help as possible. As for the rest," he paused, his gaze slowly sweeping over everyone, "maintain respect, but also maintain distance." Everyone was silent for a moment, then nodded one after another. This was undoubtedly the safest choice for now. It would neither offend a dragon rider nor completely tie Pentos to his chariot. By the time the meeting ended, the expressions on everyone's faces were completely different from when they arrived. Yesterday they were discussing how to withstand Khal Drogo. Today they were discussing how to face a dragon. Illyrio Mapades walked out of the council chamber, the sunlight spilling onto his face. Cheers could still be heard from afar. He suddenly stopped, looked toward the black smoke rising in the south, and suddenly smiled. He finally understood that the most successful investment of his life was not gold, but that young dragon rider. At the harbor, a merchant ship bound for lies slowly raised its sails. Deep inside the cabin, a secret letter sealed with wax had already been written. The white dragon has appeared. Khal Drogo has been defeated. The Targaryen bloodline has re-emerged. Elsewhere, a merchant from a road away from Pentos kicking up a trail of dust. In Bravos, the Iron Bank's intelligence network also received the first report about the White Dragon. Meanwhile, letters sealed with wax were flying along the ports, trade routes, and post stations to all corners of Essos, Lismer, Tyrosh, Bravos. The free cities were the first to receive the news. Soon, merchants, mercenaries, bards, and merchant ships crossing the sea would bring the same name to the other side of the narrow sea, Aegon Targaryen. And that snow-white dragon, no one knew where that young dragon king would eventually fly. But everyone knew that from this day on, the sky, which had been silent for over 170 years, once again belonged to the Targaryens. Chapter 48. The Magister's generous gift. The first rays of morning sunlight crossed the white walls of Pentos and spilled onto the southern plains. The earth-shattering battle of yesterday had ended, yet the grasslands had not yet returned to peace. Vast stretches of scorched earth extended to the horizon, the air still lingering with a faint smell of burning, with scattered wisps of white smoke rising, and a few clusters of unextinguished flames still flickering in the wind. Jon stood alone on the wall, gazing at the silent land. The morning breeze lifted the black hair from his forehead and stirred the black cloak behind him. In the distance, a snow-white figure was slowly moving through the battlefield. The people of Pentos had already begun to collect the bodies, while the Dothraki had taken all their fallen comrades and able-bodied horses with them when they retreated. Only the horses that had been killed by dragonfire or were mortally wounded and could no longer be taken remained. Coldfire lowered her head, using her sharp claws to clear away the charred earth, occasionally letting out a satisfied low rumble as she leisurely enjoyed her spoils of war. Jon watched all of this quietly without making a sound. There was no joy of victory in his eyes, nor any excitement from defeating Khal Drogo. There was only silence. The sea of grass from yesterday was now nothing but scorched earth and ashes, and the air still held the lingering scent of blood and burning. Jon gazed into the distance, his ears seemingly still echoing with the roar of dragonfire, the mournful cries of horses, and the screams of countless men. Ned had once told him that those who wield power must hold life in even greater reverence. Yesterday's slaughter had been unavoidable, yet his heart still could not feel light because of it. But even so, the loss of life remained heavy. Just then, soft footsteps sounded from behind him. Jon did not turn around, for he had already recognized the familiar gait. Daenerys walked slowly to his side, saying nothing, simply following his gaze to look out at the scorched grasslands in the distance. The two stood there in silence, with only the sea breeze gently blowing across the wall. After a long while she asked softly, "Did you not sleep last night?" "I did. I was just thinking about yesterday." "It trouble you?" Jon shook his head. "I just feel that every victory requires someone to pay a price. If not for you, even more people would have died yesterday." Jon did not answer. He knew what Dany said was the truth. Just then, Coldfire in the distance seemed to sense his gaze. She slowly raised her head and let out a deep, long call toward the wall. Faint smile finally appeared at the corner of Jon's mouth. At least she was safe and sound. Just then the sound of footsteps came from afar. A servant hurried up the wall and bowed respectfully. "Your Highness, Magister Illyrio wishes to see you." Jon nodded slightly. Not long after, Illyrio Mapades walked slowly up the stone steps. Behind him followed a dozen servants, each carefully carrying wooden chests, brocade boxes, and long wooden frames, their footsteps extremely light, as if afraid of disturbing the peace on the wall. "Your Highness." Magister Illyrio bowed slightly, his expression more solemn than usual. "This is the first gift of thanks from the Council of Pentos to show our gratitude for your saving of the city." With a light wave of his hand, the servants opened the wooden chests one by one. The chests were filled with crates of gold dragons, silver stags, and gold coins minted by the free cities of Pentos, Tyrosh, Lys, and others, their golden luster reflecting in the morning light. Another wooden chest was piled high with gold coins and various gemstones, sparkling brilliantly in the morning sun. There were also several longswords forged by master craftsmen and a set of light plate armor. Finally, two servants worked together to carry over a long wooden frame. Resting upon the frame was a snow-white cloak. The edges of the cloak were embroidered with silver thread in the pattern of a three-headed dragon, and the inner lining was sewn with soft, fine summer wool, light yet sufficient to withstand the biting cold winds of the north. Magister Illyrio looked at Jon and said slowly, "These are merely the beginning of Pentos's expression of gratitude. Highness Pentos will never forget who it was that saved this city." Jon looked at the staggering wealth before him, was silent for a moment and then shook his head slightly. "It is too valuable. It is far from enough." Magister Illyrio sighed softly. "If not for you, those standing here today would likely have already been reduced to slaves of the Dothraki. Compared to the entire city of Pentos, this wealth is nothing at all." As he spoke, he turned slightly to the side, signaling for everyone to back away. "In fact, there's one more gift." Jon raised his head and looked at Magister Illyrio. The fat magister still wore a gentle smile on his face. "A three-masted fast galley is already prepared at the harbor. The ship is new, and the sailors and helmsmen are my most trusted men. They are familiar with every shipping lane between the narrow sea and the free cities." Daenerys and Jon exchanged an instinctive glance. They had only just spoken of their plans to leave, and Magister Illyrio had clearly already thought it through for them. Magister Illyrio smiled slightly. "Know that your highness will not stay in Pentos. I have only one request. In the future, if anyone mentions Pentos, I hope you will remember that it once sincerely welcomed you." Wall fell silent for a moment. The morning breeze stirred the cloak and also dispersed the lingering scent of burning in the air. Jon looked at the fat magister before him and finally nodded slowly. "Thank you." Magister Illyrio bowed slightly. "To be able to assist a true dragon rider is Pentos's honor." After speaking, he did not linger but left slowly with his servants, leaving the wall to the two of them once more. The sea breeze blew across the wall once again. Daenerys walked softly to Jon's side, gazing at the distant sea, and asked quietly, "When do we depart?" "The sooner the better." Jon looked toward the end of the narrow sea. "The news of dragons appearing in the world will soon spread everywhere. There is not much time left for us. Bravos. It is far from the strife of all sides, and it possesses the largest harbor and most prosperous trade in the entire narrow sea. We can stop there for a time and also use it to understand the situation across all of Essos." Daenerys was slightly taken aback, a hint of nostalgia gradually appearing in her eyes. The red door, and that lemon tree. Jon turned his head, revealing that faint smile. "If they are still there." Daenerys did not answer, simply taking his hand gently. The two stood side by side on the wall, gazing quietly at the distant sea. In the distance, Coldfire lay in the center of the scorched grassland, leisurely gnawing on a few warhorses, occasionally letting out a satisfied low rumble. Whirru. The morning light spilled onto her snow-white scales, casting a faint silver glow. It was as if the great fire that had consumed the grasslands yesterday had never happened. But Jon knew that the war had ended, and another storm, one that would sweep across the entire world, had only just begun. Because from this day on, no one would be able to deny one thing. Jon gazed at the end of the horizon. He knew it would not be long before this news was placed on the long table of the small council in King's Landing. The king on the Iron Throne would also hear that name for the first time, Aegon Targaryen. The next time a storm was raised, it would no longer be in Essos but in Westeros. Chapter 49. A new guardian Viserys stood alone in the room, his chest heaving violently like a beast trapped in a cage. The cheers outside the window rose in wave after wave. Children waved white dragon banners, bards sang loudly, and all of Pentos seemed to be celebrating the dawn of a new era. But that name was not Viserys Targaryen. His expression darkened little by little. "Damn it." He snatched the silver cup from the table and hurled it violently against the wall. Bang! The silver cup struck the stone wall, instantly denting and deforming before rolling to the floor. But the cheering outside did not stop. Shouts were like slaps against his face. "I am Viserys Targaryen." He violently overturned the table and grabbed a crystal vase, smashing it to pieces. "I am the true king of the Seven Kingdoms. The dragon should have been mine. By what right does he have all of this?" Crystal shards scattered across the floor, reflecting the morning light as if silently mocking his wretched state. He clutched his silver gold hair tightly with both hands, his nails digging almost into his scalp. "By what right does even Dany stand by his side?" The room suddenly fell silent. Viserys slowly raised his head, a nearly manic smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. "When I return to King's Landing, those lords will swear their loyalty to me once again. They will kneel before the Iron Throne to welcome their true king." But the smile lasted only for an instant before twisting completely. He must die. At the thought of Daenerys, his eyes immediately filled with bloodshot veins. "Dany, you belong to me, not to that man of unknown origin." In the corner, a young Lysine maid was already trembling with fear. Viserys slowly turned his head and stared fixedly at her. "Are you laughing at me too?" The maid fell to her knees with a thud. "Your Grace." "No, I didn't." Slap! A slap landed hard across her face. The girl fell to the ground, blood immediately seeping from the corner of her mouth. Viserys did not stop. He grabbed her by her long hair and dragged her forcibly before him. "If you are lying to me?" He shoved the maid away violently. The girl hit the corner of the wall hard, curled into a ball, and bit her lip tightly, not daring to make a sound. "The Iron Throne will also be mine." Viserys slowly slid down to the wall and buried his head in his hands. His messy silver gold hair obscured his face. The room was full of shattered silver and vases, and the air was filled only with the maid's stifled sobs. But outside, people were still shouting. All of Pentos was celebrating the birth of the dragon rider. Only the true Targaryen prince remained, curled up in the shadows. Suddenly he slowly raised his head. His blood-red eyes stared out the window, his mouth curling up bit by bit, revealing a chilling smile. "Just you wait, Day. I will take back everything that belongs to me with my own hands." In the backyard of Illyrio Mepades' estate, morning light spilled softly onto the bluestone ground. Jon Daenerys and Ser Jorah stood beside a carriage that had already been prepared. Inside, thick blankets were spread out, and 3 dragon eggs, carefully wrapped in soft silk, rested quietly in a wooden crate. One was deep red as blood, one dark green as jade, and the third white gold. The morning light fell on the surfaces of the shells, shimmering with a faint luster. Jon reached out and gently rested his hand on the lid of the crate, his gaze soft. Coldfire ate her fill yesterday, but she must be getting impatient. Daenerys looked at the wooden crate, her purple eyes filled with anticipation. "I hope she will like them. After all, they are the last of her kind." Jorah circled the carriage, checking the axles, reins, and guards. Once he was sure everything was in order, he said in a deep voice, "Your Grace, everything is ready. We can depart at any time." Just then, the sound of hurried footsteps came from the direction of the estate. Illyrio Mepades walked slowly along the stone path, a gentle smile still on his face. "It seems you are all prepared." He bowed slightly to Jon and Daenerys first, then swept his gaze over the carriage waiting to depart, nodding with satisfaction. "However, before you depart, I have a gift I hope your graces will accept." As he finished speaking, he stepped slightly to the side. Heavy, powerful sound of footsteps came slowly from behind him. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound. An extremely burly figure slowly stepped out. Every step the man took seemed to carry immense weight. His broad shoulders nearly filled the entire stone path. His brown-black skin was covered in crisscrossing scars. Some had turned white, others still faintly glowed dark red, like a map recording countless life-and-death battles. A ridiculously large arak hung at his waist. His thick, muscular arms hung naturally at his sides, yet he still gave off a sense of oppression, like a beast lying in wait. However, compared to his fierce appearance, his expression was unusually calm, even revealing a touch of simple honesty. Jon's gaze slowly fell to the man's hands. The webs of his hands were covered in thick calluses, and there was an old, healed scar on his right index finger. These were the marks left by years of wielding a blade. Then he looked at the man's gait. Every step was steady and powerful, with not a single superfluous movement, his body always maintaining a posture ready to strike. This was not a stance struck on purpose. It was an instinct carved into his bones after countless life-and-death struggles. Jon immediately made his judgment. This was a warrior who had truly walked out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Illyrio Mepades then smiled and introduced him. "After the council meeting last night, I kept thinking about one thing, that the news of the Dragon Rider's appearance has spread throughout Pentos. It will soon spread across all of Essos. From now on, I fear there will be no shortage of covetous people, spies, and even assassins around you. Coupled with Prince Viserys' increasingly erratic emotions lately, I truly worry about Princess Daenerys' safety." He turned to the side to look at the burly man beside him. "This is Strong Belwas, formerly one of the most renowned gladiators in the Meereen Pits. He survived the death duels, and it cost me quite a price to bring him here. If your graces do not mind, I hope he can be responsible for the princess's safety from now on." Burly man stepped forward. He first bowed his head to Daenerys, then looked at Jon. "Strong Belwas," he patted his solid chest. "Protect princess from now on." His voice was deep and resonant like rolling thunder. Jon did not speak, only watched him quietly. After a moment he nodded slowly. "Welcome aboard." Strong Belwas immediately smiled, revealing a set of white teeth. "Whoever dares hurt princess." He clenched his fists. "Strong Belwas will chop off his head." After saying this, he nodded very seriously, as if he were simply stating a matter-of-fact truth. Daenerys was stunned for a moment, then couldn't help but laugh. Even Jorah's originally tense expression softened slightly. However, his gaze toward Strong Belwas still carried a hint of scrutiny. A person truly worthy of trust can never be proven by a single sentence. Chapter 50. Coldfire and the Dragon Eggs. The morning sun spilled over the hills north of Pentos. After the great battle a few days ago, Coldfire had devoured a large number of warhorses, only returning to the hills to rest yesterday. Daenerys finally breathed a sigh of relief. She truly did not want to step foot again into that scorched earth burned by dragon fire. The carriage slowly drove out of the estate, heading north along the winding mountain road. Inside the carriage, the others whispered about their arrangements after arriving in Braavos, but Daenerys' gaze remained fixed on the wooden box beside her. She gently rested her hand on the lid, as if that alone could allow her to touch the sleeping life within. She looked up at Jon. "You feel it too, don't you?" Jon nodded slightly, placing his palm over the wooden box. "I can feel life inside. They aren't dead." The eggshells remained cold, yet both could clearly sense a faint but real breath of life gestating within. The mountain road gradually grew steeper, the fresh scent of grass and earth greeting them as the familiar hills came into view. When they were still a few dozen paces from the summit, the horses pulling the carriage suddenly let out an uneasy whinny, their hooves planted firmly in place. No matter how the coachman tried to soothe them, they refused to take another step forward. Strong Belwas looked up, gazing at the colossal shadow on the hill and couldn't help but sigh in a low voice, bigger than any elephant I've ever seen. Jon jumped off the carriage first, picked up the wooden box containing the dragon eggs and reached out to help Daenerys down. You wait here for us. The two walked side by side toward the summit. Coldfire had originally been lying beside a giant rock, eyes closed in rest, but as the familiar footsteps approached, she slowly opened her amethyst-like dragon eyes. Ooh, a low and gentle dragon cry rang out slowly. She lifted her slender neck and stretched her wings slightly, stirring up a breeze that ruffled the two's hair and clothes. A smile couldn't help but rise to the corners of Daenerys' mouth. This dragon, capable of incinerating an entire army, was currently just watching them quietly, her gaze as gentle as if welcoming home family members. Jon placed the wooden box on the ground and reached out to gently stroke her broad snout. Coldfire blinked comfortably, exhaling a warm stream of air from her nostrils and letting out a satisfied purr. Woo-wah, she lowered her head and gently rubbed against Jon, then touched her snout to Daenerys' shoulder, her movements as soft as a giant cat acting coy. Daenerys couldn't help but press her hand against her cold scales. Her palm could clearly feel the astonishing power hidden beneath the armor, yet this power always displayed only gentleness toward them. Coldfire. She said softly, "Today we've brought you new friends." She slowly crouched down and lifted the silk covering the wooden box. The moment the scent of the dragon eggs appeared, Coldfire froze abruptly. She slowly lowered her dragon head, sniffing the eggshells cautiously, her movements so gentle as if she were afraid of waking the life sleeping within. When the other two dragon eggs were placed before her, she sniffed them one by one, a low and long, soft cry emitting from her throat. Woo. The sound was low and long, carrying an indescribable emotion. Daenerys and Jon exchanged a glance. They both understood one thing: Coldfire could perceive the life inside the eggs. Daenerys gently stroked the eggshells, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "You feel it too, don't you? They are still alive." Coldfire did not respond. She lowered her head again and sniffed the 3 dragon eggs one by one, then she slowly circled around them. Her massive dragon body was held extremely low, and every step was exceptionally soft and slow, as if she didn't even want the sound of her footsteps to disturb them. In the distance, Strong Belwas widened his eyes. "She's watching those eggs." Dora watched the scene in silence, saying nothing. Daenerys suddenly recalled the ancient legend she had heard in her childhood. Some said dragons possessed intelligence not inferior to humans, and could recognize bloodlines and magic. In the past, she had always thought those were just stories told by bards. But now she began to believe that those stories were not necessarily fiction. Coldfire stopped in front of the two again. She first looked at Jon, then at Daenerys. Then she slowly lowered her head, gently touching her snout to Jon, and then gently touched Daenerys. Finally, she slowly placed her broad dragon head between the two to protect the dragon eggs in their arms. Both moved toward the center almost simultaneously. Their shoulders brushed gently against each other. The 3 dragon eggs in their arms also nestled quietly between them. Coldfire watched them quietly. A moment later, she slowly lowered her head, keeping her snout before the 3 dragon eggs, and let out an exceptionally gentle, low cry. Ooh, ah, then she gently exhaled a warm and long breath. The warm current brushed past their hair and also lightly swept over the 3 dragon eggs. At that very moment, Jon suddenly felt a slight warmth in his palm. That feeling was fleeting. The next moment, the eggshells returned to their original coldness, as if everything just now had been merely his illusion. Daenerys was also slightly startled, instinctively looking at the dragon eggs in her arms, but she discovered no changes. The two exchanged glances again, neither spoke, but a hint of indescribable confusion had appeared in each other's eyes. Coldfire watched them quietly for a moment, then turned and walked back to the familiar giant rock, her massive body slowly lying down and her wings gently folding inward. Before long, the sound of even, low breathing began to resonate from her throat again. Daenerys looked at her and lowered her voice. "She must know something." Jon nodded slightly. "At the very least, she knows more than we do." "Then why did she do that?" Daenerys turned her head to look at him, a hint of a smile in her eyes. Jon looked at Coldfire, who had closed her eyes again and shook his head slightly. "Perhaps. We'll only have the answer later." Daenerys gently pursed the corners of her mouth. "It seems she likes me very much." Jon smiled. "Coldfire has always been very picky. Won't even allow people she doesn't like to get close." Smile in Daenerys' eyes deepened a few shades, but she didn't say anything more. The two placed the dragon eggs back into the wooden box, and just as they closed the lid, their fingertips brushed together again. This time neither pulled away immediately. Daenerys' heart skipped a beat. A moment later, she still gently pulled her hand back, lowering her head to hide the smile on her face. Jon picked up the wooden box, and the two walked side by side down the mountain. The mountain breeze blew gently. Behind them, Coldfire remained lying there quietly. Not until their figures had gradually receded into the distance did those closed dragon eyes quietly open a thin slit. Coldfire slowly opened her dragon eyes, gazing once more at the wooden box moving away. A very low dragon cry emitted from her throat. Woo. At the same time, the 3 dragon eggs in the wooden box trembled almost imperceptibly, nearly all at once.